Hello everybody and welcome back to What's Jay Reading, home of the old, the obscure, and the bizarre. I am, obviously, Jay, with a brand new selection of stories, so sit back and relax. The realm of dreams have always had a deep connection to the comic book industry. The infinite mindscape where anything your hopes and dreams desire can manifest, whether you want it to or not, has been a common topic for entertainment to explore since the dawn of fiction, and from some of the earliest ever drawn has that been the case for comic books. Dream of the Rarebit Fiends being a brilliant example of the uninhibited power the dreamscape has. The brilliant thing about it is there really is no right or wrong way to depict it. Any and all interpretations are as valid as another, an amount of possibilities as infinite as the people that dwell within them. But, even the dream world needs its heroes from time to time. Not every dream is a good dream after all, and someone occasionally needs to be there to pick up the pieces. No, we're not talking about Sandman. That's way too popular for this show. Instead, we're talking about heroes that are a bit more ordinary, if such a word could ever apply to dreams. Dream Police is an aptly titled series, focusing on the ordinary individuals who walk the mean streets of the nocturnal realm to keep it calm and ordinary, keeping things safe for you to have a good night's sleep. Originally debuting as a one-shot in 2005, published by Marvel under their Icon Comics imprint, before later being retooled and relaunching as a 12-issue series at Image in 2012. Dream Police was written by J. Michael Straczynski, penning the series in the midst of ruining Spider-Man Forever. Dream Police is set within the dreamscape, another layer of reality acting as a linked subconscious for the global populace. This realm is home to a wide variety of sprites, imps, and a plethora of other entities of all shapes and sizes. 1 million people every hour on the hour pass into this city, entering the world of dreams each and every night, and the denizens of the dreamscape work tirelessly to make sure each and every dream a person has is fulfilled to the letter, constantly changing shape of both themselves and the world, and ensuring things go the way they should. But when things go awry, the actors don't play their parts, an unwanted dream plagues a visitor of the city, or a nightmare spirals out of control, the Dream Police are on the call to ensure things work the way they should, and the stability of the sleeping realm is kept in check. Both the one-shot and main series follow Joe Thursday and Frank Stanford, two Dream Police detectives and their day-to-day operations, assuming that day or night means much in a world that's always asleep. The one-shot is set up in the style of police procedurals, specifically in the vein of Dragnet, focusing on an average day in the duo's job. From unwanted dreams to people stuck in loops, the duo traverse the dreamscape solving a myriad of problems plaguing the denizens. To that end, it's mostly a collection of smaller segments spread throughout, following the detectives as they bounce from crisis to crisis and work their magic. As a setup, it works with the genre JMS goes for, leaves plenty of variety without needing much of an overarching through line. Joe and Frank are rather dull characters, little focus on their individual lives beyond their job, and the duo are very much the just the facts type of cop. But enough of their personalities shine through with their words and actions to prevent them from being blank slates. Part psychologist, part detective, Joe and Frank serve more as moral guardians, in a literal sense, by solving their cases through an open mind and some stern words, never threatening anyone and only resorting to force in the most drastic of situations. Not to say the duo don't have to engage in your standard police action shootout, as shown near the end when the duo are unfortunately called in to deal with a lucid dreamer wreaking havoc on the dreamscape, a nice change of pace that isn't too jarring from the slower, more methodical story up to that point. There is a lot of humor to be found from the inherent bizarreness of the dreamscape, primarily juxtaposing the stern stoicness of the detective duo, who power through the wacky and fantastical scenarios they come across with disinterest. The Dream Police play each and every encounter completely straight, no matter how ridiculous, completely nonplussed by the surreal happenings of their world. Again, while this makes them come off rather boring, it makes sense with the premise and there's still enjoyment to be had from it. As a one-off, it's very solid, although I can see why it didn't go further than that with Marvel. While the premise leaves lots of opportunity to grow, its very slow and methodical direction can be a bit of a bore if you're not really into that style of retro procedural narrative. The art is nice and moody, heavily emphasizing darker, warm tones to set the stage for a city that's always on the verge of waking up and going to sleep simultaneously. It utilizes a very realistic, photo-reference-esque style resembling redrawn screen caps of a show that never was, which fits the very serious, straight-laced narrative. It definitely can be particularly dull to some, and I could see the series grinding to a halt if it stayed this way throughout, but I personally liked it as is. As previously mentioned, the series was retooled and relaunched over at Image, expanding the scope of the dreamscape and further exploring the mechanics behind it. The relaunched book starts off with the same basic premise as the one-shot, but shifts into a more of a noir-esque mystery relatively early on, exploring the hierarchy of the dreamscape and the exact nature of the dream place within it. Things start about the same as before, with Joe and his lifelong partner Frank out on the mean streets making sure the various entities of the dreamscape play their roles in keeping dangerous dreamers at bay. But things start becoming a bit unordinary as Frank begins to question his role, wondering aloud what exactly are the dream place and the grand mechanism of their world, feeling a premonition that something bad is about to occur. But Joe dismisses it initially, and after a quick break, he and his lifelong partner Kate Black, set out once more to patrol the mean streets of the dreamscape. That is, until Joe begins to have strange visions of a man he doesn't know calling his name, and more importantly, he begins to start having dreams of his own, an impossibility for the dream place, as they can't and don't sleep. Obviously, the mystery is evident. Frank has disappeared completely, erased from the dreamscape and retroactively replaced with a new person in Joe's memories. As Joe begins having more and more vivid encounters with Frank, somehow clinging onto reality, his own memories become suspect, and he and his replacement partner, Katie, decide to uncover the mystery plaguing Joe, and figure out once and for all exactly what being Dream Place means. The dreamscape has been reworked and expanded significantly from the one-shot, and the detectives along with it. Established as being a parallel level of reality, created at the dawn of humanity by cosmic entities to act as a sort of psychic dumping ground for the various thoughts plaguing humans. There's a full hierarchy detailed, from the rank-and-file changelings who fill the roles of bystanders in our dreams, to the bringers of nightmares clad in ghastly masks and jet black clothing, and far beyond it. Joe has been given a bit more of an edge to him compared to before. Not by much, he's not a loose cannon playing by his own rules or a grimdark sicko, but he's not as calm or polite as before, being more forceful with his words and actions, and more willing to crack wise or drop a one-liner or two. This humanizes him to some degree, making him more relatable, and it works for the new narrative and tone set forth. In terms of characterization, Frank and Katie are essentially identical, a deliberate choice all things considered, mostly acting as the straight man to Joe's pessimism and being the inciting force behind investigating the mystery of the dream place. As a foil, they work excellent, although their similarities make them hard to distinguish. Fortunately, Frank is largely out of focus for much of the comics, so it doesn't much become an issue. Katie's relevance as well comes and goes as the story progresses, some sections having an equal or even greater stake in the mystery, and others little relevance beyond being Joe's partner. The series starts off just about the same way as before, with Joe and Katie called into a variety of dream crimes or crises going on, such as in issue 2 where they have to take down an enhanced dreamer, someone who's taken drugs to dream more vividly, after they accidentally kill an aspect of the dreamscape, or the issue after when another Dream Police member is charged for interfering and harming a dreamer, forcing our duo to figure out if he's guilty or not. And same as before, I enjoy the setup, the little mini-mysteries and glimpses into the daily lives of the detectives, and the overarching mystery gets weaved into it in a very fascinating way. Hallucinatory images of Frank spliced into the backgrounds, taking shape in between panels as Joe slowly begins to question his own status. This ends up changing relatively early on in issue 4, when Frank manages to break back into the dreamscape to finally clue Joe into the conspiracy revolving around them all, and telling him to meet at the Verge, the farthest edge of the dreamscape. From here, the series shifts to more of a conspiracy thriller, with Joe and Katie breaking into the most secure records of the dreamscape to find proof before setting off on their quest. I really don't like the genre shift here, especially not so early on. The overarching conspiracy the duo tried to uncover would work fine as an overarching metaplot, having them dealing with standard cases that inadvertently tie them into the greater picture would have been a good change of pace, but the entire procedural drama aspect is dumped near entirely in favor of a more typical action narrative. Not to say it's bad by any means, or inferior to what came before. The mystery is well built, and the adventure the two detectives go on is exciting, and uses the surreal nature of the dreamscape well. Albeit because it starts so early in the story, it ends up being really drawn out. The nature of the conspiracy is incredibly obvious, and even an unattentive reader can make an educated guess about the secret it keeps very early on, maybe even before you know what the mystery is. Half of this comes from rather overt foreshadowing to it, with the discussions Joe, Frank, and Katie have and what few rules of the dream place we know make it very easy to guess. As well, there are some fairly blatant clues that lead you to the answer early, although you could argue in a few cases that it's meant as a red herring. One of the most overt comes from Joe's involvement with a woman named Mary, stuck in a recurring dream of the boring everyday life of a housewife that he finds a soothing comfort in. Although these scenes start fairly subtle, they almost outright give the twist away shortly. Now you as a viewer may have already gotten the answer yourself based on some educated guesses, but if you want to read the series yourself to confirm, you'll want to skip ahead of it. The actual reveal comes in issue 9, once Joe and Katie reach where Frank has been waiting for them. The big secret being kept from them and the other dream police is that they aren't aspects of the dreamscape, but instead normal people from the real world trapped in comas, forever dreamers who can work within the dreamscape in ways the other constructs can't. As they never wake up, they can be molded and trained to keep the peace, their old lives in the waking world covered up to keep them focused. Frank's disappearance was due to him snapping out of his coma, and to keep continuity for everyone else, Katie was put in his place with all memories altered to fit her. However, Frank retained his memories of being dream police, and he wanted back in desperately. But after returning, he discovers the chief was in on the whole thing, and in some cases deliberately keeping people in dreams forever. Afterwards, Frank decides to blow the whole secret, assuming the chief is referring to Joe. His projections and visions he sent attempts to break into the dreamscape the hard way after getting locked out. It's a very disturbing image that's painted. The idea of being permanently barred from dreaming because you know too much, and what's more that there are people deliberately being kept asleep by the powers that be for their own gain. It essentially amounts to slavery on a cosmic metaphysical level, and the anger of our protagonists is rightfully earned. As mentioned, it's not an especially well-kept secret in the narrative. The constant discussion about the dream police being out of place, needing rest but not being able to sleep or dream, not to mention a plethora of pretty blatant clues from the aforementioned sequences with Mary, and the detectives discovering dream police recruitment, pretty much spells it all out long before the story tells. That being said, there is a double twist on things near the very end that is much better foreshadowed. Not nearly as blatant, but still a reasonable guess to make based on all info given. Joe's attempts to gain his memories back and return to the waking world result in a massive standoff with the Dream Police, kicking off a crisis that could result in the Grand Masters of the Dreamscape interfering and eradicating every last one of them. This forces one of the higher-ups of the Dreamscape and the Chief to step in to finally explain things to Joe, revealing that while he was deliberately kept around for a significant period of time, having been a cop in the waking world, he was far beyond the rest of the Dream Police in ability. The real reason they've kept Joe in the dark, and manipulated his memories of his partners, and his history on the Force, is because he is already dead in the waking world. An earlier crisis that befell the Dreamscape resulted in Joe's death on both sides of the world, transforming him into a wraith, the lingering remnants of those who die while dreaming. The Chief, so tormented by the loss, feeling that Joe and the Dreamscape itself don't deserve such a fate, goes so far as to force the Grand Masters of the universe to rebuild him same as before, which they agree to under the condition he be kept from the truth in its entirety. It's definitely way better foreshadowed, evidenced by the way the Dreamscape doesn't function the same for him as it does others, and the preferential treatment he gets from the various other aspects. While it's still guessable, it's not nearly as blatant, and the double twist does pull the conspiracy up as a result, making it more overtly good and giving a sympathetic motive to everyone involved. They do overload it a bit much though, with the further reveal that the Chief's statements about keeping someone stuck in a dream was actually about Katie, who, while not dead in the real world, might as well be. This has basically no foreshadowing to it, and ultimately feels pointless as it adds nothing to her character, and mostly just tries to make the Chief's semi-bragging about it better in retrospect. Ultimately, the conflict and all problems are swept under the rug for a rather abrupt happy ending. Joe gets Mary, revealed to be his wife in the waking world, to break from her recurring dream and move on. Frank is reinstated as Dream Police to work alongside Joe and Katie, and literally every single person involved gets their memories wiped in order to avoid a full-scale cosmic reset. It's an okay ending. While it isn't at odds with the series up to this point, I would have preferred to have a more definitive closure rather than the open-ended reset to status quo. My only guess is that JMS did this to leave it open for further continuation, but whether he did or not doesn't much matter, as the nature of the reveal leaves it in a place where continuing on isn't possible. Once the proverbial genie is let out of the bottle, it ain't going back in, and whatever attempts to obscure it won't work. Overall, the Dream Police series, both the mini and the one-shot, are quite enjoyable, although it's hard to say which I prefer. Both have their points over the other, both excel in about the same sections, but falter in the same places too. While I enjoy the photorealistic style of the one-shot more, the more standard style of the mini is a better fit for the premise. The cooler color palette and less strict style allow for more surreal setting and, for lack of a better word, dreamlike designs. The overarching conspiracy plot is not the most remarkable, but does what it sets out to well, and as much as I prefer the one-off procedural mysteries, that isn't enough to carry a whole series. The characters and setting are better fleshed out and explored in the mini, and the deeper lore is explored enough to make the setting fit better than the one-shot. At the same time, the lore is only fleshed out so much. Enough to make the base narrative work, but not enough to prevent it from becoming very confusing and downright nightmarish upon further inspection. Although I'll fully admit that's a nitpick, if anything. The series isn't the most remarkable in the grand scheme of things, but accomplishes what it does very well without much fault, and serves as a good change of pace from the standard fare. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of these kinds of stories. But from here, we shift back over to a more standard fare. I've said it plenty before on this channel, and I'll say it 1,000 times more before the voices finally take over and I go on a killing spree, but crossovers get really fucking weird sometimes. Often feeling randomly generated in a way, picking characters or settings spontaneously, and giving little care for how they fit together. And to give some credit, many times they actually work out and turn out pretty good, or at least so hilariously stupid they loop around to being entertaining. Our current topic is certainly no less random than the rest. The Green Lanterns visit the planet of the Apes. Which of the two categories does it fall into? Well, we'll see. Planet of the Apes Green Lantern is a 6-issue miniseries co-published by DC and then license holder Boom Comics in 2017. Written by Robbie Thompson and Justin Jordan, with art by Barnaby Bajenda and colors from Alex Gumarez, the series is exactly what it says in the name, a crossover in the Planet of the Apes universe starring the Green Lantern Corps. That motherfucker Sinestro is at it again. Kidnapping and sacrificing a lantern from every Corps, he enacts a ritual to pierce the barriers of the multiverse to locate and retrieve a powerful weapon long since forgotten, the Universal Ring. Forged by a mad guardian as a prototype of the standard power rings, the Universal Ring granted its wearer the power to harness every emotional spectrum at a time, rather than just one per ring. Far too powerful and dangerous to allow free, the Guardians banished it to a world orphaned by the reaches of Hypertime, where none could ever reach it or return from. Unknown to the Guardians of old, this world would form no heroes, and mankind would obliterate themselves in atomic flame, and in our present era would be populated by hyper-evolved apes rather than man. When Sinestro's ritual reactivates the ring, it's discovered by the scientist Cornelius, who quickly uses his newly gained powers to right the wrongs of his world in the way he sees fit. With Sinestro hot on the ring's tail, and the stability of Hypertime quickly degrading, one lone Green Lantern makes it his mission to stop Sinestro and save all of existence itself. The man with the IQ of a guacamole, Hal Jordan. Want to get this out of the way, but I legitimately did not know this was a real series before now. I had seen this alternate cover, a parody of Green Lantern number 52, and thought it was fan art and not a genuine product. Now, I will freely admit I'm not super familiar with the Planet of the Apes series or its greater continuity in regards to the comics and whatnot. I've only ever seen the original movie, also the reboots, but we don't talk about those, so I can't comment much on where it fits in timeline-wise. I'm vaguely familiar with the stuff from later movies through parodies, so I know about the weird psychics and their nuke god and shit, but beyond that I'm pretty much flying blind. As for the lanterns, it naturally doesn't really fit in much anywhere. The story is a fairly standard crossover plot of previously unmentioned thing of X ends up in Y's hands, with not much done to deviate from that formula, although being a crossover with a non-superhero title, it gives some leeway to play with it. The ring, and its circumstances never being mentioned before this point, in any other context, would feel like a massive ass pull to throw in an extra cool OC or whatever, but the Guardians have a lengthy history of not mentioning important shit long after the point they should have, so it checks out. It ends up being largely derivative of concepts done before this, both in Green Lantern and beyond, most notably being the White Lanterns, and there isn't much done to distance itself from those concepts. The way it's played with in regards to the Apes setting is fun, being a wholly alien idea that allows you to redo familiar story beats without it being entirely redundant. It's a pretty familiar concept, but still relatable. Cornelius has nothing but the best of intentions for moving his world, man and ape alike, into a new enlightened age, and with the newly gained power to do so, quickly loses control of the situation as he deals with more pushback. The way this newfound power and his exploitation of it relates to his wife, his contemporaries, enemies, and even himself are established well and serves as the primary focus of his narrative, and while nothing that remarkable or original, is still done well. I can't comment much on the personalities or characterization of the cast, much as, again, I'm not much familiar with the Apes, but the Green Lantern crew all get represented faithfully. Hal is Hal, the usual well-meaning but headstrong dimwit. Sinestro is his usual gleefully evil self, and the rest are exactly what you'd expect. There's good attention to continuity with their reactions and motives, like remembering Guy's time as a Red Lantern, and that feeds well into the narrative, but is ultimately in the background. Still, I do like how the cast are written and they all feel very distinguishable. The writers understand them well enough to make everyone work together. I also like how the story largely avoids directly aping plot beats from the movie or doing a pseudo-remake. While Hal ends up powerless on the other world and ends up captured, same as Charlton Heston's character, he ends up escaping pretty quickly and getting back into the action. Even when elements from the movie are brought in, they're usually just as a quick nod or in the background, which helps it from feeling lazy. Like a lot of these kinds of crossovers, it ultimately devolves into a big dumb brawl as the story goes on, as the havoc caused by Cornelius' rampage spurs on the ape army, then followed up by Guy and the gang arriving. Then the Reds show up for no real reason after the first issue, has them getting their asses kicked. And for no real particular reason, the Universal Ring has the power to just make more copies of itself, and Cornelius gets his own mini army of lanterns, all of which take up a good chunk of the story. The actual battle is your standard Lantern Corps battle scene. Well drawn and well plotted, but nothing you haven't seen 100 times before. My only real negative with the story overall is in the last act, when the plot gets hijacked by Gorilla Grodd, brought to the Planet of the Apes by Guy because, well, when you're going to a planet of talking monkeys, who the fuck else are you gonna bring? Who uses his powers to take control of the various armies against the Greens and Cornelius, which is kind of just a big waste of time and adds little to the story. Same with Sinestro getting a new green ring for the final issue, as his yellow ring lost power, mostly only done to set up the ending and his inevitable defeat. The ending overall is just a bit of a mess, as Cornelius goes full psycho and tries to wipe the slate clean by using every emotion at once before being subdued, deciding to sacrifice himself to destroy the ring, and everyone just kinda goes home afterwards with no real conclusion. It's not like anything that happens is a major ass-pull. Internally it's consistent, it's just painfully unoriginal and there isn't much worth talking about. At least until the very end, with a rather strange sequel hook, with Grodd left abandoned on the Planet of the Apes, and a weird time loop thing going on too? I'm not entirely clear about that. Much like the story overall, it's not a bad ending, just nothing really all that interesting or new, and the pointless sequel hook doesn't help much. The art is solid, but also unremarkable. The designs and aesthetic are very reminiscent of Howard Porter's art, for better or worse, with a lot of nice detailing from the line work, and solid use of an expansive palette to draw a rich colored portrait, fitting for the lanterns. Ultimately, Planet of the Apes Green Lantern falls into neither category. Neither so great it's awesome, nor so bad it's good, instead ending up in the secret third category of so okay it's average. What it does is largely derivative of other works, and while it's largely done well, it's also unremarkable, and what new ideas it tries aren't handled in the best way. The two settings aren't really utilized to their fullest, and nothing in the story really feels like it needs to be a Planet of the Apes story, which on one hand works for someone who doesn't know anything about the series, but on the other makes the crossover pointless. It really isn't much worth tracking down to read unless you're a crazy big fan of one or both series, but even then you probably won't get much out of it. But that's all I have to say for now, and it's time to part ways. I'll be back again soon with more of the odd and obscure, but for now remember, if your video game doesn't have secret areas behind the waterfalls, you've made a bad game.